Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Spurs Up Show, presented by the Armchair All-Americans. I'm your host, Chris Phillips, joined as always with my co-host and my colleague, Thomas Floyd. We got a ton of packed show for you guys today. We're going to be talking the Gamecocks offense, our season preview series. We start today with the offense going into 2018. Also have an interview with a very, very special guest coming up later in the show. But first, if you're not subscribed yet, this is definitely the perfect time to do so. Like I said, we've had a ton of big guests on. Obviously, a lot of you saw we had Ryan Helinski. We've got more guests on the way leading up to football season. We're getting closer and closer to kickoff, just 32 days away now. This is the perfect time to go online, rate, subscribe, share, and download the Spurs Up Show on iTunes, the Stitcher app, wherever you consume your media, wherever you consume your podcast, the best Gamecocks podcast on the internet by far. So be sure to go check us out there. Also, of course, follow us on our social media handles. We're on Twitter and Instagram at ArmchairSCar. Also, our podcast is on Twitter at the Spurs Up Show. Pretty self-explanatory there. And again, this is a podcast brought to you by the Armchair All-Americans, armchairallamericans.com, localizing your sports coverage content. Please be sure to go check us out on armchairallamericans.com for all of your latest breaking Gamecock news, coverage, our podcast. Of course, we also cover an array of sports from collegiate to professional, anything you can think of. We're even doing esports. So please go check us out. A lot of exciting stuff happening over at armchairallamericans.com. So as I do every single time, every single week, I welcome my co-host, Thomas Floyd. Tom, it's good to have you on last week. I must say you did a pretty fantastic job with the Ryan Helinski interview, and I think the hundreds of listeners we had on would agree as well. But it's great to have you back on.
I mean, dude, I'm a beast. Like, what else can you say? I mean, was that our biggest show as far as listen-wise?
So second biggest to me and Steven Garcia. So you still don't have that one on me.
Well, eventually one day, me and the true listeners of the show will get there. The OGs who've been there since day one with me, supporting me on the show, we're gonna beat you one day. We're gonna get there. But scrape me back.
We can get Garcia on again, and you can run that one. So I think that may be your only chance. Maybe if we can get like Connor Shaw or Marcus Lattimore, maybe one of those guys will jump on for us.
It probably have to be like Muschamp. If we could get like a 5-minute interview with Spurrier, I think that would beat anything anyone's ever done on any Gamecock podcast.
I think that would probably be any podcast's biggest show, but we're gonna start this episode just like we do every episode, kind of something lighthearted, a little funny. We're gonna do our favorite news story of the week. I'm gonna start my favorite news story of the week, Tom. There's another scandal going on in Gainesville. So for those of you that may have missed it, the Florida program just continues to be in the news for all the wrong reasons. As you know, last year they had the entire credit card fraud scandal, which I think cost 12 players their 2017 seasons. Right now, a really weird story as far as a local gambler in the Gainesville area that had some connections to players that, just a lot of back and forth. I'm not going to pretend like I know all the details on it, but just more negative news for the Florida Gators program. And I'm sure Dan Mullen's interested into what exactly he's gotten himself into right now, but just crazy to see. And, it's going to be interesting to see kind of how it pans out, if anything comes out of it, but just a wild scene down in Gainesville. Tom, you there?
I had my mic muted. My bad, man. Gotta be better.
You're good.
Yeah, I was saying whenever I was muted, you can always expect Florida to have a couple guys suspended at the beginning of the year. It's how they roll. It's like Georgia, a couple weeks, you can always have a couple guys. Anyway, my news story of the week was Hale versus Sports Talk. For those of you who don't know or aren't on Twitter, Sports Talk tweeted today some, I guess, VIP information from the Big Spur. They said, per the Big Spur, USC signee wide receiver Tyquan Johnson did not qualify and will enroll at Fork Union Prep for this season. Hopes to enroll in January. And then Hale tweeted back at him, and thanks for sharing that VIP info on Twitter, Phil. And they went back and forth with each other, and it was just a hilarious thing where Hale continuously roasted Corn Blunt, which we can all appreciate. That's the news story of the week for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's anytime there's drama within the South Carolina media, I think everybody pays attention and gets a good laugh out of it, including us. Yeah. So really funny to see. But let's jump right in.
Usually we're the ones involved.
Yeah. Well, hopefully not. We're trying to get a little better at that. But let's jump right into it. Our season preview series starting today. We're going to talk offense. And Tom, I'm really, really excited to dive into this one because I think this is going to be the big storyline going into the 2018 season. Really quickly, just looking back at 2017, South Carolina averaged 337.1 yards per game a year ago, which was 12th in the SEC, 109th nationally, and 24.2 points per game, which was also 12th in the SEC and 99th nationally. The Gamecocks, coming into the season, they returned actually 8 starters on offense. Their big 3 losses, I would say, are tight end Hayden Hurst, center Alan Knott, and Corey Helms at guard. But, just quickly touching on 2017, Tom, this was obviously an offense that really, really struggled. I saw 6 of their 12 games, I believe, or maybe 6 of the 13 games that they played a year ago. South Carolina scored 17 points or less. And for the hype and the expectations that this offense had a year ago going into 2017, I remember us on this exact show a year ago talking about how good we thought that offense would be. I predicted them to score 30 points per game, which obviously they fell short of. So, you can cite a lot of that back to the offensive scheme. And obviously Kurt Roper is no longer on this staff. It's Brian McClendon's offense now. He's the OC. You bring in Dan Warner as the quarterback coach, which takes us into kind of our top storylines for 2018. My biggest thing, Tom, and the thing I think that people really aren't talking about enough, and I think I may have said this to you before, the thing I think people just aren't talking about enough when they talk about this Gamecocks team this year, when they factor in how good of a team South Carolina is going to be, is the offensive scheme that Brian McClendon is going to bring, is the improvement that Dan Warner is going to bring, being Jake Bentley's quarterback coach, quarterback guru. Because for me, I just really believe you look at last year where South Carolina struggled. It was creativity on offense, inability to adapt and adjust in game as far as making adjustments. And that really hindered this team. You could see it in Jake Bentley's eyes multiple times where he looked like he was overthinking things on the field. Obviously, injuries played a huge, huge role as well. I don't want to skip over that. 2017, South Carolina had 3 starting O-linemen go down with injuries. You had Debo Samuel obviously go down in the 3rd game. You had Rico Dowdle go out for extended time. So this offense was definitely snake bit by injuries a year ago. But Tom, talk about kind of, taking into what happened in 2017. South Carolina obviously gets the new O coordinator, and Brian McClendon, internal promotion. He, is the coordinator for the Michigan game. We saw kind of what happened in the spring game with, I think one of the reasons, just going back to why I think people aren't really factoring in McClendon and Werner as much as they should, because I don't think people are totally convinced that South Carolina is really going to go as up-tempo as they say, because Will Muschamp said that from day one that he wanted to go up-tempo, and Kurt Roper obviously never established it. But talk about kind of your feelings about, I think a lot of us had hype going into last season. A lot of us have hype coming in this season. What makes it different in 2018 that this offense, you have a feeling, or do you have a feeling that they're actually going to produce at the level we think they are this fall?
Well, with last season, I always thought that, if Debo stays healthy the whole year, and obviously with him being such a huge part of the offense and on special teams, with him being obviously a great kick returner, if he stays healthy, we have a good year on offense. And obviously he goes down the 3rd game, the offense goes to crap. You go to scoring 35 on NC State, who had number, I think 5 pick in the draft last year for a defensive end. I can't remember where he went exactly at, but you go from playing NC State, winning that neutral site game, 35-28, then going on the road to Missouri, winning 31-13, and you go from that to laying an egg at home in one of the most hyped games that probably ever at South Carolina for them to be. You win that game and then you're ranked, and then they lose that game, and just all the hype for the rest of the year goes down the drain, which it really, it was deserved that the hype went away. But I think that this year, a lot of the offensive success is going to ride on whether or not Debo can stay healthy and if there's a decent running game. Because Jake is not the type of quarterback to me who can sit in the pocket and throw for 5,000 yards like Drew Lock from Missouri can. I don't think they're the same quarterback. I don't think the offenses are the same. And I think with McClendon being back there instead of Roper, I think he's going to be more inclined to go to the running attack than Roper was. With McClendon calling plays, I have a lot more confidence than this year.
Yeah. Oh, and I 100% agree. And I made a joke earlier, I think a couple of months ago, or I've made the joke fairly often. I think anyone at this point would have been an upgrade from Kurt Roper. All due respect, I think the guy knows football. I think if you sat down with him and talked offense, I think he'd probably talk your ear off, and the common man like us would probably be confused by the end of it because the man knows so much offense. But I really just think in game, being able to make adjustments, having any sort of creativity. We talked about it earlier this week in our South Carolina Slack channel. We were kind of chatting about the offense, and one of our writers, Noah Patheo, was actually rewatching the South Carolina Missouri game from a year ago and was talking about the predictability of the offense. And I mean, I 100% agree. I mean, there are games, it's pretty bad when there are games I'm sitting there watching they're in the shotgun, you got a back to your right. Every time Hayden Hurst goes in motion across the line, it's a run. Every single time. Every time South Carolina's in a 3rd and 1, 4th and 1. Line up in a bunch formation, handoff of the middle. I mean, it was pretty elementary stuff. But, to one point you made talking about the running game, and, it's obviously going to fall a lot on the offensive line, which I want to jump into first. Because in my opinion, again, a position unit for South Carolina that maybe isn't getting enough talk, but I think is going to maybe be the most important to South Carolina's success this season is the offensive line. You got 3 starters returning. I think it's about 71 starts overall. I'm really intrigued to see with the running game just how the new scheme helps that offensive line out, because obviously when you're going a little bit more up tempo, you're getting a little bit more speed. I think blocking assignments maybe get a little bit easier for these guys, more so like zone blocking schemes versus like a man-on-man type deal. So I'm really just intrigued. Again, I'm going to talk scheme a lot because I really do think they're going to make a commitment to an entire new offensive scheme this year. I just can't see a scenario. I think Will Muschamp recognizes that college football right now is fast. Spread, tempo. And I think he understands, and I think McClendon and Dan Warner do as well, that you have to run that type of offense to have the success they're looking for. So starting with the offensive line, again, you have 3 starters returning. I think your most talented offensive lineman returns at Zach Bailey, who slides back over to guard, which is his more natural position. He should be the day 1 starter at left guard. The big thing to me, Tom, talking about this offensive line, and you got to feel confident about it. He was nominated for a preseason award. Donnell Stanley, he moves to center. Like I said, was nominated for the Remington Award for the top center in college football. So obviously the guy's got talent. But to me, anytime you have a new center on the offensive line, it's definitely a talking point, because that is the quarterback of your offensive line. That's the one that makes all the calls. He makes all the checks. Obviously the quarterback or center quarterback exchange on the snap is very important, under center and shotgun. So to me, how does Donnell Stanley handle that transition? If he can handle it well, I think it's going to be a huge plus for the South Carolina offensive line. But, the good news for South Carolina from a year ago when they had all the injuries, they had a bunch of young guys play. They do have some experience coming back. The top 6, Will Muschamp cited, he's extremely comfortable with those guys. And then from there, you got a lot of youth and inexperience behind them. Not saying you don't have a lot of talent, but it's a lot of youth and experience. Talk about kind of your feelings on the offensive line as we move into 2018 in a fall camp. I mean, what are your feelings overall on the Gamecocks offensive line as of right now?
Well, I feel good. I think the offensive line as a whole is athletically a lot better than last year. It's not to say that Corey Helms and Allen Knott weren't good players. I just think that moving Cedarius Hutchinson is a guy that no one's really talking about. I think that he could have a really big year. And then you have Donnell Stanley at center, who can be, he's obviously a good player and a great talent, considering he's on the Remington award list, like you said, the preseason award list. And I think that moving Zach Bailey back in the guard, his natural position and where he's going to play in the NFL, and he's considered a very highly touted prospect, according to a lot of NFL analysts. I just think that you have to have a really good feeling about them this year. Because I think when you compare this team to, say, like a Clemson or a Georgia, I think Zach Bailey could start on any offensive line in the SEC. I would think that. And that when you have a guy on your offensive line who's like that kind of player, you you're doing something well on the offensive line.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think the thing I love about Zach Bailey moving back to the inside, at the 2 guards and center, you've got Zach Bailey, Donnell Stanley, and like you said, Cedarius Hutchinson. You got 3 guys over 300 pounds there. I think being much bigger on the interior offensive line is going to help them out a lot in the running game. You surely think it would. Then you've got guys like Dennis Daly out at left tackle. He should be the transfer from Georgia Military College, had 11 starts a year ago. You've got Malik Young. If he can return from injury problems, I think he's a guy. He had 4 starts a year ago. He was one of those linemen to get hurt. I mean, he's a guy. He's a redshirt senior. He's played a ton for South Carolina. He's got a ton of experience. He's a guy you feel really good about. And then your other tackle spot, you've got Blake Camper, who's a guy, again, had 2 starts a year ago, but he played in 13 different games. Is a guy that has a ton of experience, another senior. So, I mean, overall, I think South Carolina, again, to me, maybe not all of the success, but a large portion of the success. And we're going to find a lot about this offensive line early when you take on a team like Georgia, who's stacked on the defensive side of the ball. But this offensive line, to me, that's going to kind of be what I'm looking for the most. What kind of comes out of this? And you'll hear in our interview later in this show with Michael Felder, he actually agrees. He thinks the offensive line, it's going to be the difference between South Carolina having a good season versus the potential of being able to have a great season. And I 100% agree. And like I said, it's going to be really interesting to see how those guys mesh. But I think if they can, this offense can be really, really explosive. Moving into, a pretty important position itself, the quarterback position. Jake Bentley obviously returns as your starter, the junior. Had a pretty solid season last year through 18 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Struggled in the last 4 games of the year or so. Really, really struggled. You saw his struggles against Florida. Obviously, Clemson ate him up. Michigan for a better part of 3 quarters, he was pretty pedestrian. But obviously, this is going to be a huge year, in my opinion, for Jake Bentley. We talked about in our position unit previews, or I did, just talked about kind of Bentley, what this season means for him. As far as, moving forward, not only for himself personally, not only for South Carolina, but also his NFL potential. I mean, there have been some people that think he could be a top, 3 or 4 round draft pick. I mean, whether he is or not is going to determine a lot on his play. But, a year ago, again, I mean, was right at about 62% of his completion percentage, almost 2,800 yards, again, 18 touchdowns, 12 picks. Talk about, Tom, in your opinion, what's the biggest thing? What's the biggest jump you want to see Jake Bentley make from his sophomore season to his junior campaign?
Well, I think he has to be more careful with the ball. I mean, this year he had 18 touchdowns and 12 interceptions or something like that.
12 picks, yep, 12 picks.
I mean, that's way too many in my opinion. And I think that if he can learn to take care of the ball more, and I think a lot of his interceptions last year were based on Roper's, incompetent offense. And I think that, like Muschamp said, and Bentley has said multiple times, that the faster he plays, the better he plays. And you can see that in the spring game with the way he played, that when they were getting the ball out fast and he was making quick decisions when he was playing his best in the spring game. And that's his freshman year when he played his best against teams like Tennessee, and I know it's UMass, but when he played well against UMass, it was because he was making quick decisions. I think if he can get back to that this year and actually show up in some big games like Clemson and Georgia and Florida, then we're going to be pretty set for a great year.
Yeah, and you make a great point, Tom. We actually had that conversation. I completely forgot about that when you talked about how Jake Bentley looked in his freshman year versus last year. I definitely think, and Jake Bentley's referenced this too, that South Carolina going more up tempo, with the new scheme they have, is probably the best thing to happen to him in his college career. And you made the great point from his freshman year. I really think, he's a guy that really just needs to go back there and sling it around. He doesn't need to do a whole lot of thinking. Not to say he can't. He's obviously an extremely smart football player, but I think maybe last season they may have put too much on his plate last year. I mean, he's, I hate to keep throwing out the young card for him because it's just overplayed, talking about Jake Bentley when he should have been in high school, stuff like that. But I mean, he should be a sophomore this year. So he's not he's not like a 22-year-old senior, 21-year-old senior. This is still kind of a young kid. And I think a year ago, I'm not sure if he was quite ready for all that maybe, like you're saying, Kurt Roper was trying to put on his plate. And I think this year, speeding up the offense, sort of simplifying things, catch and throw, more so knowing where the routes are going. Again, I just think the up-tempo offense should help him out a lot. My biggest thing for me, and a good friend of our show, Brad Crawford, made this reference on Twitter. I've agreed with him and also made this reference in the past as well. To me, Jake Bentley's just got to be better in big games. The games against Georgia, Clemson, not just him. I understand the entire offense, the entire team needs to be better. But when you're talking about taking care of the football, I was at that Florida game a season ago. Florida was not that great of a team. I know they've got some dudes on the defensive side, but Jake Bentley just extremely careless with the football. I think of the miracle catch. We've all seen the Hayden Hurst catch in which he one-handed it. But that was an absurd play. That should have never happened. Jake Bentley just flailing the ball up, kind of threw his head back and just tossed the ball up, just throwing up a prayer. Like you said, he's got to be more careful with the football. I mean, he's got to be able to take care of the ball. He's got to be able to show up, in my opinion, and play top-notch level football against top-notch competition. And I mean, I talked a little bit about this with Barrett Sallee a little while ago, a couple months ago. I'm a little worried that Jake Bentley might have a little bit of an Air Murray syndrome to him, which is that he can't seem to find a way to win the big game when the lights come on for him. Sometimes they seem a little too bright. Again, I know he was young last year, and this is going to be a big season to prove me wrong and to prove that he can win that big game. But against Clemson, against Georgia, against Florida, against some of the bigger competition. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but I feel like in the past he seemed a little jittery and a little uneasy back there, and maybe not quite as confident as I'd like to see my starting quarterback.
No, you're right. He was shook like the entire and against any team when we played them. They were, I mean, more or less. I would say Georgia last year where he wasn't that bad compared to the other games, but I know for a fact against Florida he was awful. And Clemson both years he's completely crap. I mean, for lack of a better term, crapped his pants when the lights came on. I mean, I know it's Clemson and they're one of the top teams in the country, and it's not easy to play against them when you have an incompetent offense last year, and he wasn't really, I would say, comfortable with it. It's harder on him, but he has to be able to play better in those games for South Carolina to be successful and for them to have a chance to win the SEC East. Because if he don't win that week 2 game against Georgia, then this is going to be a long year for us, I would think. A lot of fans, the entire season in their head is dedicated to that game. And I understand it could not be determined on that game, and there are other things that could come into play, but that game is such a big determiner, and it's so early in the season. I think that Bentley has to start out well and start out on a good note against Coastal and then come out and throw the ball well against Georgia. Even if we lose, I think he has to play well for him to be able to even be considered an NFL prospect.
Yeah, and I was going to say that too. Fair or unfair, there are a lot of people putting a lot of stock in that week 2 game, and if South Carolina's going to have the kind of season they want to have, they really need to find a way to maybe win that football game. If nothing else, like you're saying, I think Jake Bentley needs to just show he can play well in a big game like that. I mean, if nothing else, I mean, if Jake Bentley throws for 300 yards and South Carolina loses a 31-28 or a 28-24 game, God forbid, I think you feel a lot better as a South Carolina fan coming out of that game saying, well, we lost to Georgia, but, they did go to the national title game a year ago. We've got 10 more games left on the schedule. You can still get to a double-digit win season. Versus if South Carolina really struggles on offense, Jake Bentley throws 3 or 4 interceptions and just really doesn't look good doing it, South Carolina fans are really going to become disgruntled, maybe unfairly so, but that's just the world we live in with big-time college football. So, again, it's going to be interesting. I'm not trying to knock Jake Bentley. I don't want anybody to think that. It's the offense all incorporated as one struggled against top-notch competition, but as the starting quarterback, as a leader, to take that next step. You can't, there's a saying, you don't ever let them see you sweat. And that's the biggest thing for me with Jake Bentley. Don't ever let them see you sweat. You can't look timid back there, look scared back there. You've got to be the leader of this football team. And again, I feel very, very confident that he's going to do that and will look much, much better in a more up-tempo, quick scheme. So I think scheme is going to help him a ton. I want to touch a little bit on some of the backups, Tom, as far as the quarterback position, because there are some interesting storylines as far as the quarterbacks are concerned. Obviously, you've got Michael Scarnecchia, your backup quarterback, who's I believe he's a redshirt senior. Didn't attempt to pass last season. It's funny, Jake Bentley was the only guy to attempt to pass last season, except Hayden Hurst threw 1 pass, which was, I thought, pretty funny. But Michael Scarnecchia is your backup. He's a redshirt senior. And then it gets very, very interesting from there. You got Jay Urich, the redshirt freshman. You've got Dakereon Joyner, the true freshman, Mr. Football in 2017. He comes in as a true freshman, obviously an extremely dynamic athlete. You saw it in the spring game, his running ability. He's not very polished as a passer. I'm kind of torn on, I've heard some people say that he will play. I've heard some people say that they think he absolutely should not play. Tom, I'm in the camp that with the new redshirt rule, you get up to 4 games. I'd be pretty surprised to not see Dakereon Joyner see the field at some point in the season. And you obviously hope that Jake Bentley in that offense can get you out to a big enough lead in games like Coastal, Marshall, Chattanooga, where, Dakereon Joyner should get some snaps. But in my opinion, it's going to be an interesting storyline to follow through the season. But I think Dakereon Joyner might need to be a guy you kind of get a look at in some of those smaller games.
I mean, yeah, I agree. I think that him and Urich should at least get looks in those games if we're up by a lot, or even if we're getting killed, I think they should get a chance to come play in. But, I mean, you're obviously looking over Scarnecchia then, which I guess he understands at this point. He is what it is. He's a college backup. But I think that, I think fans want to see Joyner, and I know Will Muschamp doesn't really care what fans think about the way he runs his offense and his team. But I just think that if you let us see them in a game, it'll give you better hope about what they could do whenever they're actual real starters in the SEC. If Jay Urich or Dakereon Joyner ever become that for South Carolina, and that could be tough with Ryan Hilinski coming in. You never know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a different conversation for a different day as far as what is the quarterback competition going to look like in 2020 or even next year. But, I'll say this as far as in regards to, I talked about this a little bit in my quarterback position unit preview. I 100% think that Michael Skarnecki is a formidable backup. He can, God forbid, again, Jake Bentley gets hurt, but Michael Skarnecki can do some good things. But you have to look at it in this sense. Michael Skarnecki is a redshirt senior. DeCarrion Joyner and Jay Urich are going to be your quarterbacks of the future. And at that point, when you're playing garbage time, me personally, I'd rather see the guy that's going to be at South Carolina for the next 3 to 4 years than the guy that has 11 games left in his college career. So be that as it may, maybe it's unfair, but hey, that's just the reality of the situation. So moving to a really, really intriguing position here, Tom, I want to talk about running back. We actually previewed this position today. Very, very interesting again. I mean, you've got you've got your top 4 guys coming back. They're all juniors. You've got a ton of experience at this position. It's all led by junior Rico Dowdle. You got the junior Tyson Williams. You've got the junior AJ Turner. And then you've got the junior Mon Denson rounding them all out. To me, Tom, the biggest question for this unit, because Will Muschamp talked about it at SEC Media Days, he feels extremely comfortable about running back, wide receiver, and tight end as far as their depth at those skill positions. And who can blame him? I mean, we're about to talk about the South Carolina wide receivers and how much of a beast of a unit that is. And then tight end, even with the departure of Hayden Hurst, you've got 4 to 5 guys that I think could fill that role very, very successfully. But talking about running back, I mean, you've got 4 guys that are capable that all scored a season ago. To me, Tom, the biggest question is, and I think last season they struggled with this because it was very running back by committee coming into last fall. They didn't really feel the need, I guess, to establish number one. We're just going to go with the hot hand. To me, I think you need a number one back as a guy to say, hey, when the going gets tough, when it's 3rd and 1, when it's 4th and 1, and we need a first, we're giving the ball to X. Am I wrong for thinking that? Do you think that this backfield can work off of a committee format more so than what I'm saying, or do you think they need to establish a number one back and then kind of have the other guys sort of fill in roles and needs as they come along?
Well, I mean, I think that, in my opinion, I think that either Rico or Tyson Williams needs to come in as a number one back. I don't think that there needs to be it's a good problem to have that you have 2 good backs that can both be starters, but I think that, I think I would go with Rico with the way I know he's played in big games before, and Tyson's been a guy who's been good on the practice field and it hasn't translated on the football field yet, but in spurts. And I think that, AJ is obviously what he is. He's a 3rd down back, getting space and getting the ball and letting him make plays. And I think that, if Rico can separate himself and be the number one back, the true number one back, I think that'll be the best route for success for South Carolina's running game this year. I think that's what's going to have to happen for them to be good. It's not that the running back by committee can't work, but I think that it's the better option is for have a true bell cow and then let others work off of him.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, the running back position, it's so intriguing because the guys you have, I mean, Rico Dowdle, to me, he's the best running back on the roster. And this is no knock on any of the guys, especially not a knock on AJ Turner, because when I say he's the best, I think he's the best overall rounded running back. I think AJ Turner is the most consistent by far. You can look at the stats and the numbers. I mean, AJ Turner ran for, I think, 531 yards a year ago. He averaged 5.4 yards a carry. I mean, like you said, he's a guy that when he gets the ball in space, he's a guy that can score anytime he touches. And I think he's a very, very underrated player. But the overall best running back on this roster, in my opinion, right now is Rico Dowdle. Now, I think if Tyson Williams could ever figure it out, we've heard about he's kind of had some mental issues as far as, looking really good in practice, and he just can't seem to translate that over to under the lights and bring it to the field and bring it to game day. I think Tyson Williams has got the most talent of anybody on the roster as far as running backs are concerned. I think Tyson Williams is an absolute freak, can make all the moves, has the speed, but overall, I think Rico Dowdle, I mean, anytime you see a guy, to me, the biggest telling thing to me is when Rico Dowdle set out for 5 games, I think, last year. As soon as he comes back, makes an impact. Michigan game, you saw it right there, ran in for the touchdown. When a guy can do that, when they come back like that and make an immediate impact, you're like, that guy's pretty special. That guy's a pretty good player. So in my opinion, I completely agree with you 100%. I think Rico Dowdle needs to be the number one guy, and I think Rico Dowdle should be that number one guy as long as he's healthy, because listen, what happened his freshman season, I don't think is the anomaly. I think it is who Rico Dowdle is. And if he can get back to that, I mean, he run for like 776 yards in like half a season. I mean, the guy's got talent. It's obvious to me. The guy can be one of the top backs in the SEC in my honest opinion. Now, will he get the carries maybe to have the stats with those guys? Probably not. But I think it's just really interesting to see how you can use these guys because I think each of these running backs are good at different things. I mean, I think Rico Dowdle, again, is kind of your all-around. He's a bruiser between the tackles, but can also have the explosive play. So I think he's kind of your all-around back. I think Tyson Williams is sort of your home run threat, has the speed, has the juking moves, has the ability. Then you're talking about H.A. Turner. He's kind of more your scat back. He's good in halfback draws, screens, speed sweeps. You saw like he had against Tennessee for the touchdown there. And then don't forget about Mon Denson. I mean, he led South Carolina with 61 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns against Florida a season ago. Just kind of a bruiser, big dude. I think a tough guy with a chip on his shoulder. So it's going to be very, very interesting. But again, Tom, I think the biggest key for them is establishing who's your number one guy. And then, hey, let's get everybody. And to me, again, the offensive scheme, going back to the scheme, how are they going to incorporate and rotate these guys in and out? Because you've got a great problem. I mean, South Carolina has an abundance of riches at the running back position. So it's going to be very, very, very fun to watch for sure. Moving to a very fun position unit to talk about, the wide receiver unit. Tom, I think this one might be the best unit in the SEC, and I'm not sure they're even getting enough love in the preseason. Obviously, it's led by Deebo Samuel, who decided to return for his senior year, thankfully for South Carolina after suffering an injury in week 3 a year ago. Obviously, we all know what he did. He was selected as a preseason first-team All-SEC wide receiver, all-purpose back, return specialist. He literally played in 3 games a year ago, had 6 total touchdowns, which he only played in 3 games, and he tied for the team lead in touchdowns. Just let that sink in. You've also got Brian Edwards. I'm just going to run through the list here. Deebo Samuel, Brian Edwards, Shi Smith, or Trey Smith. Then you get into Chavis Dawkins, Randricus Davis, Chad Terrell, who I think is going to be injured for the first couple months of the season. You bring in some of these talented freshmen like Josh Vann, Darius Rush. Talk about, Tom, I'm kind of interested to get your feedback on, what's your feelings on the wide receiver unit for South Carolina? Because I know as a South Carolina fan, I'm giddy to watch these guys, especially when you get in a 3-4 wide set and you talk about the Smith brothers, or the Smith duo, if you will, Brian Edwards and Deebo Samuel on the field at one time. I mean, as a South Carolina fan, I'm giddy to watch those guys on the field all at once.
I mean, yeah, you look at South Carolina, their wide receiver core, and they have 4 guys who can be a starter at any college in America, in my opinion. I think that Ortre and Shi don't get enough credit. I think, especially Ortre, in my opinion, I think he's a guy that could be an Alshon Jeffrey type player. Not that he's that level of talent, but I think that he has the same play style, can just go up and get the ball over you. And I think with Shi, more similar to like a Shaq Rowland, but he's actually and Shaq Rowland, Nick Jones, ex-player who can actually. But I think his production is going to be there compared to those players. And when you look at a guy like Deebo, who's a first-round talent and can be a top 10 pick if he's healthy this year, and can prove that NFL teams that he's can have a full year of production. And then you look at Brian Edwards, a guy that obviously I think is underrated nationally, but could be a top 3-round pick in the NFL. I mean, you don't see a wide receiver talent like that in a lot of places. And obviously, I think they're the best wide receiver core in the SEC. I think you'd be hard pressed to find another team that has that much. You look at a guy like Josh Vann, who's was an Army All-American last year, probably won't touch the field that much this year at all, which is shocking to me. I just think that the depth they're building at wide receiver is really good. I think that Brian McClendon has done a great job recruiting there, and I think that they're set for a pretty good year if Jake can get them the ball.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I mean, I'll tell you this. I talked about how important the offensive line was, really all the positions we've ran through, how important it is. But to me, the most important thing for this 2018 South Carolina Gamecocks offense is the health of Deebo Samuel. I mean, this offense was, granted, for all of the shortcomings that Kurt Rupper had, and there were many of them, as soon as Deebo Samuel went out, this offense changed. I mean, it completely changed. Deebo Samuel gives them that home run threat that they just don't have without him. I mean, and trust me, I'm on the camp with you. Brian Edwards is a star. He's a star in the making, and I think he's a guy. I mean, he had 793 receiving yards last year, 64 catches, 5 touchdowns. Doesn't get talked about enough. Guy's a beast. Guy's a flat-out beast, and who knows? I wouldn't be surprised to see him get up to 800, maybe 1,000 receiving yards if this offense really gets clicking. But to me, Deebo Samuel, I think he touched the ball 19 times, and he averaged over 20 yards a touch. I mean, the dude's a home run threat. And this South Carolina offense is just different with him on the field. So the biggest thing is, and he hasn't done it since he's been a Gamecock. That's the biggest, maybe the most concerning thing for me going in this season is, can he stay healthy for a full season? And if he can, I agree with you 100%, Tom. We've seen some projections in the offseason. I mean, there are people projecting Deebo Samuel as a top 10 NFL draft pick, which is that's some serious company to be in. But he has that playmaking kind of ability, but it's just, can he stay healthy for a full season? And if he can, it's just going to make a world of difference with the South Carolina offense. But I 100% agree with you that Brian Edwards, absolute freak, underrated. I think the Smith, I call them the Smith brothers for some reason. I don't know why I do that, but the Smith boys, Ortre and Shi Smith. I mean, Shi Smith had both of those guys, had a not so quietly good year, but I mean, a better year than maybe you even think stats wise. I mean, Shi had 29 catches for 409 yards and 3 touchdowns. Ortre Smith had 30 catches for 326 yards and 3 touchdowns. And oh, by the way, Shi Smith didn't drop a single pass a year ago as a true freshman in any of his targets. So pretty impressive stuff there. So again, Tom, I just think it's going to be very, very exciting to watch, again, in the scheme, how they use these guys. And again, can Deebo Samuel stay healthy for a full season? That's going to be the big question that's really going to be surrounding this unit, because I think Deebo Samuel's the kind of guy, when he's on the field, he makes everyone better. He's going to make that entire unit better. He's going to make that entire offense better. Moving into the tight end position, very interesting one here as well. Hayden Hurst is gone now, first-round pick to the Baltimore Ravens. He kind of now leaves a void. Tom, I think the question for this unit is just who's going to fill his shoes. You've got a ton of different guys, a ton of different options. Jacob August returns, the redshirt senior. He's a returning starter from a year ago. Casey Crosby as well, Kyle Markway, Keel Pollard, Evan Henson, Will Register. There's a ton of good tight ends on this roster. And Tom, I'm just going to kind of just let you take this right here and just talk about sort of your initial reactions to how big of a void do you think Hayden Hurst leaving, or how big of a void do you think Hayden Hurst going to the NFL leaves this South Carolina offense? Do you think they can recover? And do you think there's guys on this roster? Do you think it's going to be one tight end that's going to take up all his receptions? Or do you think it's going to be a multitude of guys kind of making up for the loss of Hayden?
I think that, with the way you look at the tight end position last year, it was Hayden, and that's all they cared about throwing the ball to. They really weren't trying to get Jacob August the ball. I think he might have had 5 receptions last year, but I think that with Casey Crosby, I think was a guy 2 years ago that was got a lot more targets than he did last year, and I think that him and Jacob August being the blocking tight end, in my opinion, would probably be able to fill the void mostly. But you're not going to replace a first rounder. It's just not going to happen. And I think that that obviously tight end position has a lot of depth, like you said. I think we're set up for a good year there, but just depends on how much Jake can get them the ball.
Yeah, I agree. I think Jacob August is a really, really solid player. I think he's going to be really used in the run game. Kind of a bigger guy. Like I said, he only had 6 catches last year. I mean, it's good to have him for when you need him, but I think the guy to watch from this unit of guys, the tight ends, is Casey Crosby. I mean, he was my pick a year ago as sort of someone to watch, a breakout player for 2017. Didn't pan out. He only had 2 catches for 11 yards. He obviously got hurt, which really hampered him there. But, I think we saw you saw a little bit of what he could do in 2016 when he had 23 catches, 217 yards, 4 touchdowns in 2016 as a sophomore. To me, I'm going to be really interested because I think he's just such a versatile player. I mean, I think Casey Crosby, his versatility to me is what's going to really set him apart from the rest of the guys. I mean, we really don't know anything about Kyle Markway. He's a redshirt junior, but we don't really know anything about him. Only played in 2 games a year ago. Keel Pollard's kind of a guy who, again, hasn't really done a lot. I mean, he hadn't had to. You've had Hayden Hurst. Evan Henson from the basketball team is a guy that I've heard is an absolute physical freak, a specimen. Will Register, redshirted a year ago. So there's a lot of guys you don't know a lot about. I think there's a lot of talent there. But to me, man, I think the guy to really, really watch is Casey Crosby, because I think he's a guy that can line up at tight end, be an absolute just a matchup nightmare for opposing defenses. You can put him at tight end. You can slot him in the slot. He's going to be bigger than any defensive back you're going to put on him. So to me, Tom, Casey Crosby's really the guy that I'm looking to see, hey, what is this guy going to do? Because I think he's got all the talent in the world, and I'd love nothing more to see him go out his redshirt senior year, his senior year, to have a big year for the Gamecocks. I mean, it's just going to make the Gamecocks offense that much more explosive if they can get any type of production or any type of solid production from their tight ends.
Yeah, so, I mean, I was going to say, I agree. I think Casey, if he has a big year, then the tight end group should be, set. I think, like I said before, I think they have a lot of depth. I think that's a good problem to have. It's hard to replace Hayden Hurst.
Yeah, no, I think what's going to happen too is I think a lot of the receptions that Hayden had a year ago are going to go to wide receivers. I mean, I think if Deebo Samuel stays healthy, but again, you've got so many options at wideout now. I think a lot of those receptions that Hayden had, because you're thinking where are his catches going to go. I think a lot of them are going to go to wide receivers, but I just think KC Crosby to me is kind of that wild card in this offense. What can he do? He's sort of the H-back type, again, tight end, hybrid-ish type player, can play in the slot again. I just think he's a guy that could be an X factor for South Carolina, and maybe not a lot of people are talking about him or really expecting a ton out of him, but I think he's a guy that in this new offensive scheme could give some defenses some trouble. So we've talked about the offense, Tom. We've basically broken down every single position. I want to talk about just 2018 as a whole. What are you, let's just kind of almost a prediction, if you will, but what – again, there's a lot to be optimistic about. There's a lot of question marks as well. You got a new OC, you got a new quarterback coach, you got a ton of you got 8 returning starters on offense and a ton of guys that have played. What are you expecting out of this offense, and what will make a successful season for you as for this offense? What are you expecting, and what's going to quantify as a success in 2018?
I mean, to me, the offense has to average 28 points or more. I think for us to be a 10-win team and to be where I think that the whole team as a whole can go, the offense has to put points on the board. I think when Will Muschamp's team scored more than like 20 points, he's like undefeated, maybe, or only lost 3 games, something crazy.
His
like
record
that.
when his team scored 21 or more is just stupid. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, so just put some points on the.
Tom, you there? No, yeah, I think the biggest thing as well is that just South Carolina is going to need to average at least 28 points per game. I think Jake Bentley needs to throw for at least 3,000 yards or more this season. I think he needs to break the 20 touchdown plateau to really take the next step. I think he's going to have to take the next step. I think the biggest keys for the offense, again, Jake Bentley taking the next step, a healthy Deebo Samuel all season. The offensive line needs to mesh and gel together. Donnell Stanley at center. How does he handle the new center position? Establishing a number 1 back and then finding an X factor at tight end to me are going to be the biggest questions. But I think the success for this to be a successful season for this offense, they need to average I agree, at least 28 points per game. I'd almost say even 30. I mean, I know that's kind of a stretch. I think I said that even a year ago that this offense needs to average 30 points per game, but it is a realistic option. They have got weapons all over the field. And then when you play a team like a Coastal, like a Marshall, like a Chattanooga, I'm just talking about the smaller games, there's no excuse for South Carolina not scoring at least 35 points. There just really isn't, unless you're trying to play conservative, which I do not see that happening this season. So I think we lost Tom there, but want to jump into that's our offensive preview. If you guys have any comments, questions, any feedback, feel free to leave us to us. I mean, you want to give us your opinions on kind of the South Carolina offense leading into 2018. We'd love to hear it. A little bit of other news that actually just happened as we were about to come on the air. Luke Doty, 2024 star quarterback out of Myrtle Beach, commits to the Gamecocks. Huge pickup for Will Muschamp and company as they continue their success on the recruiting trail. Really nice pickup for 2020. Doty, a kid that, again, plays quarterback at Myrtle Beach, is obviously a younger guy being a 2020 commitment. It's going to be really interesting to see. I mean, he's a guy that has, we've heard a lot of good things about, a really, really fast kid. I think he actually heard he ran a 4.40. So it's going to be very, very interesting and fun to see. Obviously you got to keep that commitment for a long-term period, but South Carolina, Will Muschamp, those guys continue to kill it on the recruiting trail. So great to see from Doty as well. So again, not sure what happened to Tom there, but
Chris,
we're about to. Hear me? Oh, you're here? All right, cool, cool. So you're here.
I think my Wi-Fi went out. I'm sorry, guys.
No, you're good.
Sorry. Not at my house right now. Recording on the road, basically. Tough for me, but like Chris was saying about Doty, he's a good prospect, guy that's been trending up recently, kind of like Alinsky did. Not that I think he's got he's got a lot of offers, many from the SEC, ACC, and Big 12 so far. Guy that I think is going to continue to go up. The only way I think his commitment could ever waver is if Clemson offered, and then he would be kind of be hard there, but I don't think that Clemson's going to offer him. But I think, he's a guy like Alinsky, great character, going to be a really good quarterback for us in the future, potentially. If not, he could work it out as an athlete, started safety last year, some from Myrtle Beach when he, had to move to the bench as a quarterback. But I think he's a guy that the traits are there to be a really good quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, again, it's great to just see the staff putting in work, not only for right now's recruiting classes for 2019, but obviously looking ahead to 2022. You have to keep building. And, you look at the programs like Clemson, Georgia, Alabama, that's what they do. That's what you have to do in college football. So great to see the staff putting that work in. So, overall, Tom, any other thoughts on the offense? Anything as far as from you? We're about to transition into our interview with Michael Felder, formerly of Bleacher Report, currently of Stadium. Any last words on the offense or anything else?
I think that's the biggest thing for today is that we just have to, or for the offense as a whole, I think that they have to have a running game. If it's not there, then we're not going to have a good year in scoring wise. Jake led the team in rushing touchdowns last year. That's not great for a white kid who's really not that great of an athlete. If it's Kelly Bryant at Clemson, then it kind of makes sense, but not for South Carolina the way our offense works. I just think that our running game has to be better this year.
Yeah, and that's a great point you make as well. I didn't even bring that up, is that Jake Bentley was tied for the team lead in rushing touchdowns. I completely agree with you. I mean, it's not so much – it's just that Jake Bentley is not exactly a fleet of foot quarterback. I mean, he can make some guys miss and get you a first down when you need it, but I don't think he should be counted on to lead a team in rushing touchdowns by any means. But anyways, we're going to wrap up the preview. We're going to move into our interview with Michael Felder. So, again, we appreciate you guys listening. Enjoy this interview with Michael Felder of Stadium.